Okay, for this lecture, this is our second AP lecture. I'm going to call this colonial religion. And this really comes to light. There's a lot of religious talk in chapter 3, but especially in chapters 4 and 5, you'll start to see how religion and its influence in the English colonies developed over time. For this conversation or for this lecture, I'm going to look at a couple handouts on our documents: Puritans, the Great Awakening, and the Enlightenment. Okay, this handout, it kind of gives you an activity to do. It gives you notes on Puritans. It gives you notes on the Great Awakening, and then it gives you notes on the Enlightenment. And what it's asking you to do is to read through those notes and consider, for each kind of period of religion in the colonies, what does that type of person believe about God, their reason for existence, the relationship to the church, the importance of education, the individual's role in government, or the individual's responsibility for improving society. If I were you and I was really studying religion in the colonies, I would probably read through these notes and jot down some ideas relating to those 6 concepts. Just in short, I'll say kind of the way I view this. Religion was a very prominent influencer in the early colonial development. In general, it had stronger influence the further north you went. So people who came to like Jamestown and the southern colonies in general were part of the Anglican Church, and they didn't have a lot of qualms with the Anglican Church, and chances are their religious devotion was not the number one thing in their life. They maybe cared more about family or making money. However, as you move north and you get to the New England colonies, religion for many of them was the primary reason that they came to the New World. So the Puritans, they were upset with the Anglican Church. They wanted to either separate from it, or the Puritans wanted to purify it. And so these migrants to New England, they came to the New World seeking religious freedom. As a result, Puritanism was very strict. It was very detailed, and it was very influential on colonial life. They believed in predestination, that you were chosen by God, and that you had to live out your calling as a visible saint. In New England colonies, Puritanism kind of shaped all aspects of the colony. The church was the center of the town. In order to participate in lawmaking or in civic duties, you had to be a formal member of the church. This basically meant that you had to be a male. And everything that you did, the way that you work, your work ethic, the way you went to school, you went to school so that you could learn how to read the Bible, and school was primarily for clergy. A school like Harvard was created, for those purposes. This is why mothers taught their kids how to read so that they could study the scriptures. So religion in the Puritan culture in New England was very, very strong. Not as much in the South. However, over time, as generations pass, you get to the second generation and the third generation of New World families, and that religious fervor begins to wane a little bit. In the late 1600s, the Puritan Church, or what's also called the Congregational Church, issued what was called the Halfway Covenant, which meant you could now be a church member and not have had a true religious conversion experience. You were at least partially a church member, essentially just because your parents were. This kind of weakens the influence of the church, and in general, it shows a weakening of religious faith in many New Englanders' life. It's against this backdrop that you see kind of crazy things like the Salem witch trials in the 1690s. And it's also against this kind of waning religious fervor that there becomes a need for a revivalist movement. So when you get into the early 1700s, probably around the 1730s and 40s, we're going to see something known as the Great Awakening. This is a revival of religious fervor and emotional appeal to commit to various Protestant beliefs. Many of these ideas came across the Atlantic. This is a big idea that it's called a transatlantic exchange. As religion was on the rise in England, traveling preachers came across the Atlantic Ocean and then moved around in the colonies having revival meetings and open air sermons. One of the famous ones is George Whitefield. Another famous one that I think you have homework on is Jonathan Edwards. And this is a revival movement. It's calling people to repentance. It's calling people to denounce sin and to become more active as their religion is calling them to be. This Great Awakening is not as unified or singularly, able to be contained like Puritanism was. Puritanism is a very specific thing. This Great Awakening has some diversity to it, both geographically and in its ideas. However, this revivalism doesn't last forever, and in the 16 and 1700s, this kind of enlightened idea is also on the rise. And by the time we get to the American Revolution, Enlightenment ideals, what Thomas Paine would call the age of reason, is beginning to shape the way a lot of leaders are thinking. You don't want to go crazy with this Enlightenment stuff and think that all like mainstream colonists and future Americans were now all of a sudden deist and didn't believe in traditional church. But Enlightenment ideas were beginning to shape the ideas that will go into our Constitution and the ideals of independence. And really the Enlightenment is an emphasis on human reason, progress, and it really doesn't need God, because the Enlightenment is going to trust your senses. At best, and you can see down here at the bottom, in Enlightenment, God is he's there, but he's a watchmaker and he's no longer present. Under Puritanism, God is present and personal, and certainly God was personal during the Great Awakening. Now, the way this worksheet shows is it says this transition from Puritanism to the Great Awakening to the Enlightenment shows a transition from authority to individualism. If you take notes and you kind of break down these different concepts, I think you'll see that to be a pretty good summary of religion in the colonies. Now, here's the last thing I'll show you. I really like this handout. This one's called Ben Franklin's First-Hand Account of His Impression of George Whitefield. This is from Ben Franklin's autobiography. George Whitefield is a great revivalist preacher in 1739, and he comes to the colonies and starts preaching, calling people to commit their lives to the faith, but also doing some social justice initiatives. Here he's talking about, I believe, building a home for orphans and disadvantaged kids. And Ben Franklin, who is kind of the personification of American Enlightenment ideals, is there listening to George Whitefield's appeals. I love this document because it kind of shows the interaction between the Great Awakening and the Enlightenment. If George Whitefield is the Great Awakening, Ben Franklin is Enlightenment views, and they're going to kind of butt heads a little bit. I've got a document with some annotations, and I might try to upload this and put it in a link here for you as well. That's it for now. That's religion in the colonies. Definitely feel free to jump on during my office hours and ask me questions if you have them. Thanks, guys.